The default PIDs fly freaking amazing. So if you're out there, especially if you're a beginner, just don't worry about all this stuff. Just go fly.
One of the biggest questions that people ask when I talk about PID tuning is, why does PID tuning involve so much guesswork? Today we're going to look at a tool called Plasmatree PID Analyzer, and the goal of this tool is to give you more insight in a rigorous way without so much guesswork, to give you more insight into what your PID controller is doing and how well your quad is flying, so you can make changes to your PIDs to get your quad to fly better with less guesswork. Stay tuned. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and this is FPV Know-It-All, where you learn everything you need to know to get your quad in the air, keep it flying its best, and enjoy the great hobby of FPV. And keeping your quad flying its best is what we're talking about today, because we're talking about PID tuning. If you want to know more about what is a PID controller, what does it do, and what is the P, the I, and the D gain, I'm going to suggest you check out my PID Tuning Masterclass playlist, in which I go into all of that stuff. Don't let the fact that it's called a masterclass fool you into thinking it's not for beginners. It's absolutely for beginners. Now, Plasmatree PID Analyzer is a pretty deep tool, and we could do a lot of videos about analyzing the results that it shows us. So this is not going to be the definitive guide to using and tuning with Plasmatree. I'm going to show you how to get it set up and how to start gathering your own data, and we're going to go through some tuning of one of my quads. And the big question that I want to try to answer is, does the tuning method used by Plasmatree produce a quad that flies well? Because I'm not necessarily convinced that tuning the way Plasmatree suggests, it produces this kind of mathematically perfect PID controller. But is that actually what we want? Like sometimes when you're driving a car, you want the car to go straight, and sometimes you want to kick the back end out and make donuts. And mathematically speaking, a donut is not, or drifting the car is not the most efficient way to go around the turn, but sometimes that's what we want. So I'm really curious to see how a quad tuned according to Plasmatree is actually going to fly compared to one tuned by hand. But let's go over to the computer and let's start getting Plasmatree set up and tuning with Plasmatree. First thing you're going to need to do is download the Plasmatree PID Analyzer. You can do it from this URL, which of course is down in the video description. You're going to click on the releases page, and here we've got PID Analyzer 052.exe, which is a Windows executable. If you run Windows, this is what you need. After the download finishes, I've gone into my Windows Explorer and I've made a folder for this project, Plasmatree PID Analyzer. You can make that you can make it on your desktop, you can make it anywhere you like. And I'm going to open another window and I'm going to go to my downloads folder, and here is PID Analyzer 052.exe. I'm just going to drag that over. Frankly, you could just run it from the downloads folder if you so desire. I just don't like leaving things in my downloads folder. The other thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to download Blackbox Tools. And again, link is in the video description for this. I'm going to go to the releases page and I'm download the Windows zip because I'm on Windows. And in that zip file is a tool, blackboxdecode.exe, and I'm going to need to put that, nope, not there. There we go. I'm going to need to put that in the same folder as the Plasmatree PID Analyzer. And that is all you need to do. If anybody out there has any experience with web development and wants to make an online version of this so that people don't have to deal with all this nonsense, that would be fantastic. I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard for someone with the right know-how since the Python source code is available, but for now, this is what we've got to do. And then in order to run the PID Analyzer, you're just going to double-click the exe file, and your virus scanner may freak out at this point. See, like this, because it's just a random exe file you downloaded off the internet, and it's very, very suspicious, and you're going to need to whitelist it in any way that you can normally do. The same thing is going to need to be true for Blackbox Decode as well. You're going to need to let that run. The other thing you're going to need to do in order to use Plasmatree is set up your quadcopter right. And normally the mantra that I go by is tune like you fly. So however you normally fly, that's how you should be tuning. But in this case, that's not going to be true, because Plasmatree is going to want to look at like the pure PID response of the quadcopter without too many things getting in the way. And the idea is that if we can get this pure, perfect mathematical PID response under very controlled conditions, then we'll get great flight the rest of the time. Is that going to be true? Well, we'll have to see. But here's the way you need to set up your quadcopter to let Plasmatree work its best. In the configuration tab, you're going to want to disable anti-gravity. That's one of the things you're going to want to do. In the PID tuning tab, you're going to want to set your set point weight to 0, even if that's not normally how you fly. They suggest you set VBAT PID compensation to on, and I'm going to suggest that you set TPA to 0. I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to go to filter settings and I'm going to set my filters up. Now, you set your filters up the way that you normally set them up. So if you know that there's a way that you want them, you're going to want to tune that way. This is how I set my filters up. I have PT1 on the D-term low pass and all of the notches off. This would be very risky to do, except that I also have the dynamic filter enabled. And this is how I suggest, frankly, I've always thought that this is how I tune my quads, but I've hesitated to recommend that everybody else do it that way, because if you don't filter enough, then you smoke motors, and I don't want to be responsible for you guys smoking your motors. But I have it on good authority that Betaflight 3.4 is leaning towards going this way, that if you have the dynamic filter enabled, then you can safely disable the notch filters in most cases. So maybe that's a general guideline that that everybody could take advantage of. That's how I'm going to do this one, though. In the command line, we're going to want to set debug mode equals notch. Now you can see mine is already set that way, but you're going to need to do that and then type save. And that will log some additional debugging data that Plasmatree is going to use. And then finally, in the Blackbox tab, you're going to set your Blackbox logging rate to 4 kilohertz. You can set it higher if you have enough flash space and SD card data, but 4 kilohertz is the minimum you want for this type of thing. And you're going to want to erase the data file. If you have a flash chip, you're going to want to erase it so that the only stuff that ends up in that chip is the stuff from your current flights. Folks, as we go into this part of the video, you're going to hear me start referring to yesterday. No, you did not miss a video. There was no video yesterday about this topic. I spent about a day working on this and not flying the quad right and getting garbage data, and then I came back. So for me, it's the second day of doing this, but no, this is the first video. Please don't be confused. Now, you can do this line of sight if you are a better line of sight pilot than I am, but I am a terrible line of sight pilot, so I am doing this FPV. But basically, what the Plasmatree guys say you want to do is just, as you can see, sort of shake the quad back and forth on all of the axes, roll, pitch, and yaw. And what I'm trying to do is do some that are a little slower and some that are a little more like full stick deflection, and that's going to generate the data that you need to do the optimal PIDs. I'm skeptical, to say the least. It's hard for me to believe that doing these little motions can make the quad fly good, but it's not like this is a new concept. This is something that people do to tune PID controllers in other domains, so why wouldn't it work here? Let's find out. Now that we're back from that first flight, I got to download the Blackbox log off of the flight controller. I'm going to do that by going to the Blackbox tab, and in my case, my flight controller has an onboard data flash chip. I'm not using an SD card, so the way I'm going to do that is by hitting Save Flash to File, and let's just call this, let's not call it Flight 1. Okay, and we'll just hit save. This will take a few minutes. It's especially going to take a few minutes because, as you can see, I filled up the full 16 meg of my data flash chip because I did a whole pack's worth of freestyle flying at the end. If you're logging at 4 kilohertz, you're not going to get very long of flying before the chip fills up, and it's one of the advantages of an SD card. Yesterday, while I was trying to use the PID Analyzer, I could not figure out how to get it to work with drag and drop and was going to the command line to make it run. Just in case you've seen any of that, here's the right way to do it. And if this is the first time you've seen, I don't know how the edit's going to go, but if this is the first time you've seen it, what you do, all you got to do is double click this. And then what was confusing me, and I don't want it to confuse you, is this window will sit here for freaking ever, like literally 3 minutes. This will happen. And once that happens, don't close this window because it'll take you 5 more minutes to start the darn thing again. What you can do then is just drag and drop your file there. And do I hit enter now? Let's try it. There we go. Optional plot name, nah. Show plot window when done. Nah, I'll just look at the, bounds on auto. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now we're doing it. So that gives you some things you can tweak, but just run through it. And what it's going to do is it's going to spit out some PNG files here in the TMP folder that it's going to make in your in the same folder where the PID Analyzer exe is. Oh, it's so much better than yesterday. I'm very, very pleased. You can see here the width of this sort of blue shadow right here. That is how sort of confident, how much noise there is in the data. And the thinner that is, the better. And so if we look at some of the graphs from yesterday, look at this. Do you see how this is just all over the place? And that's because, I think it's because I was raising the throttle and moving the throttle too much. And basically all I was getting was noise. I wasn't really inputting stick commands very much. You can see right here, basically roll was centered, and then I did 1/2 turn and came back down again. I wasn't really doing a lot. So this seems to be way better, just the sort of hovering, and you can see here just banging the stick left, right, left, right. And what do we need to do to tune this? This is a graphic from the Plasmatree wiki showing the effect of low, normal, and high P gain in the step response graph. And the basic way to interpret the step response graph is that you want to see this line as close to 1.0 as possible. When this line is close to 1.0, it means that the quadcopter is doing exactly what it's being commanded to do. And when this line is not at 1.0, it's indicating, at least according to this philosophy, that you want to change your PIDs somehow. So when the P gain is low, what we see is that the line approaches 1 and takes longer to get there. Notice that this line passes 1.0 roughly about halfway here at 0.05 seconds. Whereas here with higher P gain, we see that it's a steeper line and it gets to 1.0 faster. In fact, it gets there about twice as fast. This is time on the x-axis here. And we see that with higher P gain, though, there's also an overshoot and a ringing oscillation, which is, we kind of don't want too much of that. Well, that's debatable, because I've been talking to a bunch of people who've been playing with this, and some of them say that for a quadcopter, you really want a relatively sharp response, and some overshoot is actually going to feel better. But the point is that you can look at these lines and you can tune the response of the quad to be however you think it ought to be. Classically, we would want something like this, but that's if you're tuning like, a thermostat or a valve in a industrial application. Maybe a quadcopter, the optimal line is a little different. Let's see what we've got, though. What do we got? And on my quad, the one that jumps out to me is pitch, and it certainly looks like pitch is looking like the low P gain example in the wiki, where we have an overshoot and then a slow move back to 1 with no oscillation. So that's suggesting to me that pitch P should go up. Yaw, there's a sort of a sharp move here and then a long delay before we get to 1. Because the yaw axis on a quad does not have as much authority as the pitch and roll axis, we may not be able to get the optimal response on yaw. We'll try. But on the yaw axis, it's based on the torque of the motors, not the thrust of the props. So they're just not as responsive on that axis. But again, we see that we take a long time to get to 1, and there's no oscillation. Again, suggests that P gain should go up. And on the roll axis is the only one where we see some overshoot and maybe oscillation. The other thing that you guys may be wondering is what's the deal with the orange line versus the blue line? Plasmatree breaks out the step response for times when the quadcopter is going over 500 degrees per second and times when the quadcopter is going under 500 degrees per second. The idea is that you may have different response at full stick deflection versus when you're doing relatively mild moves. And so we can see that at full stick deflection, that's the orange line, we do have some oscillation here. But the blue line, which is the center stick moves, it doesn't have much oscillation and in fact takes relatively long to get back to 1. So maybe that P gain needs to go up as well on roll. So let's try raising P gain on all the axes, and we will see what effect that has. So I'm going to take P from 40 on roll up to, let's say, 50, on pitch from 58, let's say, to 65, and on yaw from 70 to, let's say, 90. Yeah, let's say 90. How did I pick those numbers? I don't know. I just knocked them up by approximately the same proportion. And again, we can refine this as we go to see how well it's working. So let's compare these two flights to see what kind of change the change in PIDs made. And you can see here the P gain was 40 for the last flight and 50 for this flight. And I see more consistency between the orange line and the blue line, meaning that the difference between the quad when we're at center stick and when we're closer to full stick deflection is more consistent. We are seeing an overshoot and then a return to the line. The overshoot and the bounce is not very sharp. What people have suggested that you want to look for with a quad is a strong overshoot and bounce, and then on the line. And this 0.1 second response time is a little less than that. It's not as sharp as some people have suggested that you want to be looking for. So I'm going to continue to raise P and try and sharpen up that overshoot and that bounce. How about on the pitch axis? Well, on the pitch axis, it seems like we didn't exceed 500 degrees per second. And okay, so again, it looks like we have decreased the time it takes to return to the 1.0 line. So here it took approximately 0.2 seconds to get to 1.0 step response, and here our step response is much faster. We're closer to 0.1 seconds to get to that step response of 1.0. So that feels like an improvement. We're going to keep going that direction. And on the yaw axis, it's a little unclear whether any change has really occurred. So I guess we're going to keep going. In the PID tuning tab, we're going to raise everything up again. Let's go from 50 to 60, from 65 to 80, and from 90 to 110. My philosophy of tuning has always been, if you're not sure what you're doing is making a difference, keep doing it until you figure out whether it's good or bad. So this is very interesting. As we're raising P, we can see that this response is getting more and more like that classic, like the example that we showed of when P is right. Let's go back and see if we can, there it is. So we can see this is what we're kind of going for, or maybe something kind of like this, depending on what's optimal for a quad's flight field. But we were getting this, and now we're moving toward this. So that suggests some validity to this method. Ultimately, how it flies will be the final determinant. But we're starting to get there. We're seeing a bounce, and there's no rebound here. It's just coming right to the line. And so that's kind of good. I kind of feel like maybe I go a little further on pitch. Yaw, now we do have a little bit of a rebound, but the rebound is not quite at the line yet. Now, there's no D term on yaw, despite the fact that this is P, I, and D, but there's no D term on yaw in Betaflight. So we only have P and I to play with. I wonder what would happen if we raised I just a little bit. This one feels about right. Let's go just a little more. Yeah, what the heck. We'll raise P just a little more on all of them. All right, folks, as you can see, we could keep chasing our tail round and round in circles for hours and hours and hours, and in fact, I did. But we're already 20 minutes into this video, and I think you get the point. Does it make your quad fly any better than any of the other methods of tuning? And I'm going to answer that question by showing you two freestyle flights, one on Betaflight default PIDs and one on the Plasmatree PIDs. And I got a surprise for you. I actually tricked myself. I flew on what I thought were my PIDs, and it turned out they were the Betaflight PID default PIDs, and I finished them and went, oh, that's pretty good. Wow, yeah, that thing really seems to work. And then I looked and realized I was on the default PIDs and was like, well, shoot. So then were my PIDs or the Plasmatree PIDs any better? Well, I'm going to show you the two flights and you can see what you think of them.
honestly, that is going to be really tough to call. The difference is, I think, pretty subtle. I don't think I could have picked out anything bad about either tune, like in terms of like nose wandering or anything. I think there was more prop wash oscillation on the second one because of the higher P gains without raising D gains. So the next step might be to raise D and try and clean that up. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure I would have complained about the first one, the stock defaults. So I think what I'm going to say, because I mean, we could keep chasing our tail on this one forever. That's the nature of tuning with a tool like this. And this video is probably already 40 minutes long. I think that Plasmatree is a useful tool for giving you information about what your PIDs are doing. And that probably there's a way to use Plasmatree to refine your PIDs. So much of PID tuning is just feel and guesswork. And for people who maybe don't have as much experience with tuning to be able to get what they want via feel and guesswork, then having Plasmatree to give you objective feedback to try and make that graph look a certain way can be useful. There's more to say about Plasmatree, and I'm going to be making more videos about it. Like, for example, the noise analysis is something we haven't touched on at all. And we haven't played with the D gains either. Maybe I'll do some of that. But I think it's a great tool because it does provide an objective measure of what your PIDs are doing. And for so many of us, that's really what we need. But if there's something to take from this, it's also that the default PIDs on, and this is Betaflight 3.3, 3.4 is supposed to be even better. The default PIDs fly freaking amazing. So if you're out there, especially if you're a beginner, just don't worry about all this stuff. Just go fly and be a better pilot, be a better builder. But if this sounds like something that's interesting for you, now you know how to do it. That is going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching. Happy flying.